Thank you. If anyone has cards that they would like to turn in now, you can do so at any time. I'll just shuffle them in, so it'll be randomized and anonymized. No one will actually know who wrote it. You know, just like Google doesn't really know anything about you because they randomize and anonymize everything. So I'm gonna go through these. There were a couple that are a little kind of the same question, so I'm just sort of combining those. But the first one is, what operatic role haven't you sung but would love to? I just sort of had a experience recently. There's an opera by Verdi called La Forza del Destino, The Forces of Destiny, and it's actually has a lot of great music. I saw it in Barcelona, and it's just not done that often. So it's like one of those things, like, I'd really like to sing that, and you guys are going, what is that? But, that's it. So honestly, most of my sort of musical bucket lists I've been able to check off along the way. So I actually feel kind of blessed. And some that I didn't even know should be on my bucket list, but got on there. So, it's hard to cast. I think you have to have like 4 really strong Verdi singers and a good orchestra and stuff, and it's not as popular as something like Aida, that sort of a thing. So, yeah. When did you know you wanted to be a pastor? Well, the first time Easy appeared to me out of a spacecraft and took me to orbit around Vega. Some people have big experiences that push them, they feel, in a very particular direction, and that was not my experience. I had lots and lots of small experiences. I had lots of nudges, not just from inside, but also outside, from people that I respected who always sort of like, have you considered, what about this? And I noticed this about you, have you thought about doing this? And one person even, sometime, like when I was a young adult, even said, you could do this job. You should really think about doing this job. You can do the gig, is actually, I think, how he put it. And so, yeah, so and this might come up actually a little bit later, and I was talking to someone earlier today about this. Like, for me, like, I don't have a clear path in life. It's very sort of like a fog, and the fog gradually condenses into a pool of water and then into an ice cube, and then that's what I know that's where I'm at, because sort of the reality of the direction that I've been is sort of condensed into a single thing at some point. And then I goes, oh, well, I guess this is where I was heading all the time. So that might be a little confusing for folks, but I don't have a very particular sense of where things are going, or that everything is sort of planned out. It's very much sort of, the Spirit is more like a wind. It's more like sailing rather than being a motorboat. Where you just point the boat where you're going, rather than sort of like, well, where's the wind taking us? And maybe we got to go over here, if we can go over there, and maybe eventually we'll get where we're going. But maybe when we end up is not where we started the journey heading towards in the first place. So it's a roundabout. Well, you got to get off somewhere. Here's the thing, though. People in Oregon still don't know how to drive around roundabouts. So it's a new one. It's a new one in the U.S. But yeah. Anyway, I have very similar ones. If you had to submit a problematic passage, what would it be, and why would you submit it? And there's one that's kind of the same kind of question. I'm going to be honest. I don't know that I have one particular, and that's in a sense because of the way I understand biblical interpretation. And that I think we as a culture and a society, read the Bible really literally, and the reason we have problems is because even though if we say, oh, we don't really believe all this stuff really happened, we still think of it as if it did, and so we sort of interpret it almost as if it really did, as if the character of Abraham, had some kind of psychology and is sort of like wondering about what kind of decisions he's making as he's leading Isaac up the mountain to sacrifice him or something like that, which is understandable and fine. There's no reason not to do that, but also that's not how the story is presented, and so it's kind of anachronistic to read it that way. So we bring a lot of baggage into our interpretation. But I would have to say, if there's one thing that I find an interesting conundrum, is, and we've been reading in Samuel, 1st and 2nd Samuel, and 1st and 2nd Kings, and to me the big question in those books, which is all about David and Saul and Solomon and the kings that come after, and there's a real question throughout that, I think, is about agency. What is God's agency in a situation? What is human agency in a situation? Sometimes people are seen to be pushed or forced by God or some spirit to do certain things, and then God blames them for it. And God will cause certain things to happen, sometimes good things, sometimes bad things. God sort of has favorites, it seems like, or not. He forgives David, but he doesn't forgive Saul. Why is that? And so there's this real, and I think for a lot of us in our lives, we have a lot of questions about agency because we often feel like we carry blame and responsibility sort of to the degree that we have a certain amount of agency in something. And we have a very sort of narrow and specific way of understanding that. Why is that person in jail? Well, they made some bad choices. Okay, seems like it might be more complicated than that. So what is our own agency, and what is God's agency, if God is sort of like direct, and a lot of us had this idea, God is just like directing everything. That the universe is like a big machine and has to work a certain way, otherwise it won't work. And I think that might be an impoverished way of seeing things and get us into more trouble than we might realize. Because I don't know if the universe works that way. It might be a bit more dynamic. It might be a more like a sailboat than a motorboat. And I think that has implications for everything, from how much we blame people for what they do, and how much we glorify ourselves for the things that we do. And so I just think that's a really interesting sort of thing to wrestle with, and I think it comes up the most maybe in Samuel and Kings, which is a very quid pro quo. I tell people, a lot of times we love the stories of David and Solomon and the stories of the kings and stuff, because in a sense that's the world we actually want to live in. Like, we really think it's okay for God to punish someone if they did something wrong, and we really want to be super successful like David or Solomon. And sure, we can have a little fault, but God will forgive us for that, right? And so we really want to live in a world that's very black and white, that's very clear, that doesn't have a lot of ambiguity. Now, granted, those stories have tons of ambiguity that we skip across because we really only learn those stories in Sunday school when we're like 6, and we may not revisit them like as a grown adult and see some of those ambiguities or pick them out because we're so familiar with those stories. So I think that whole, I've really kind of enjoyed our Bible study in that morning time. It's kind of because of that, because I think it raises a lot of questions about how we tend to sort of organize our society, I think. So anyway, that was kind of a long. What is the hardest thing about the Reimagination Project for you? I think it just says, what is the best thing? I don't know. The hardest thing is the ambiguity. I think, I don't know, but and this kind of comes back to the Samuel and Kings bit. We all kind of hate ambiguity. We kind of hate the sense that, well, maybe it might not be black and white. Maybe the outcomes are going to be unpredictable. And so I think a lot of the Reimagination Project for me is just that ambiguity of like not knowing and not really knowing for sure, and just sort of seeing things again, like starting with a fog that maybe condenses into a rain and then like freezes into a puddle or a block of ice or something like that. It just sort of seems to me to kind of be gradually condensing. And so that's how I sort of like think about that. To me is sort of discernment. It's like keeping an eye out and not trying to close off paths until they really seem to be closed off, and to be open how things are developing, because you never know. And the more people that are a part of the conversation, the more you learn, and the more you learn about other possibilities that maybe you hadn't considered. So being open to that process, and yeah, it is hard. We were talking about my different colored. Well, this is a T-shirt, but the different colored like clericals I wear. I wore black clericals a lot, partly because I didn't want to have to decide in the morning what color shirt I was going to wear. It's nice just to get up and just to like know what's going to happen in the day. And when that happens, it takes work. It takes effort. And I think you can perceive maturity. You can measure maturity based on the ability to tolerate pain and the ability to tolerate ambiguity. And I think to the degree that you can work in that shows like the degree in which you're adulting in the world. And we all have a long way to go with all that stuff. How do we respond without screaming when someone says we're getting closer to the realization that all Muslims should be removed? Wow. Well, I'm not a screamer, so there's that part. I was talking to this other pastor once. We were talking about, this is years ago, about some protests that were happening, and she was like, "Yeah, I go to those sometimes, but I do." She said, "I'm just not a yeller. I'm just not someone who yells, But I think very often one of the ways we can engage with someone who says something like this is to ask questions, and to kind of like start digging. Like, why do you think that? Where does that belief come from? And I don't know what they would say. If they would say, well, they're all non-Christians, they should go live in their own country or something like that. Then, well, what about the Christians that don't believe what you believe? Should they also leave? So what do you think of, like, I don't know, should maybe if they're unwilling to go, we could like put them in a camp somewhere to live? Like, what exactly should we do with the Muslims that are here and have been here for a long time? And just try to figure out, and then also, how many Muslims do you know? And in what way do you know them? What do you know about Muslims? And so I think a lot of times when people say things like this, it's pretty easy to judge, because it's a horrible thing to say. But I think, again, the next step would sort of be, well, yeah, but like, why? And to try to figure out what led them to believe this. Because the thing that you believe, you've come to as well. I mean, I don't know about you. Maybe you did. I didn't grow up like with Muslims around me. You know what? Here's the thing. I didn't grow up with Mormons. There are fewer Mormons in Louisiana than there are Lutherans. I can tell you that. And for me, Mormons, I wasn't sure the difference between Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses. They're both people that like showed up at your door and like asked you questions and stuff. I honestly, like, literally, I did not realize that there was a difference, or like, I didn't know what the difference was. And there are massive differences, right? Massive differences if you know anything about either of them. But I didn't know. So someone had said, like, we should get all these Jehovah's Witnesses out. I say, yeah, and those Mormons too. It's like, they're just the same. You know what I mean? So a lot of this comes out of ignorance. I didn't know any Muslims growing up. Most people who have opinions about Muslims don't really know any Muslims. Right? So they're assuming that what they've seen on TV or what they've heard or whatever is a part of that. It does go, I think, like in my mind, it goes back to the Iranian hostage situation. Right? And there's a line for a lot of people between that and 9/11. Right? And people don't know about the Muslim world before the Islamic revolutions that happened in the 60s and 70s. And what, say, Egypt or Iran or Iraq was like before that period, before those revolutions. Right? So we have a super narrow snapshot of what Islam is and what Muslims are quote unquote like. I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure there are more Muslims in Asia than there are in the Middle East. Because of places like Indonesia and the Philippines, right? There are a lot of Muslim countries in Southeast Asia, right? So we have a very narrow understanding of what that is. And the great horror, I don't know, I think the great horrors that communities, that societies of people have committed have always started with the world would be a better and maybe perfect place if those people weren't here. We either kill them or we kick them out or we get them out of here. And then we'll have utopia. Then life will be better. So far, that has been a very empty road that has yielded no benefits and only horrors. Utopia is dangerous because it gives you an excuse to do terrible things to your fellow human being. So, but before you start preaching that, it might be important to say, why would you say that? What does that mean? Where did you hear about that? How many Muslims do you know? Right? So, and maybe they've had one encounter and it was really bad. Hopefully you have a counterexample. And if you don't, well, you've known at least one Muslim because she ran our AV system for a couple of years. Right? So, what do we do with Jesus' statement in John, no one comes to the Father except through me? Is that actually a salvation statement or something else? I would say it's something else. I mean, I think it's pretty, and we've talked about this, but to me it's really clear that the New Testament, that the theology of the New Testament as a whole, with a couple of side examples that maybe lean some different ways, but I think you can pull some things in, is that what Jesus reveals is that God is transforming all of heaven and all of the people and all of the creatures in it on the earth into paradise. And that nothing is escaping God's grasp. So, and I think that message is the message of Jesus and is very clearly in the message that Jesus proclaimed, specifically in the Gospel of John. Especially in John 3:16 and 17. Right? And so, does it mean that no one comes to the Father except through Jesus? Yes, actually, I think it does. And like Jesus the person, but who Jesus is and what his life means and what it says. Right? So it is only in the Spirit that God is saving all of the world in the love and expression of Jesus, in whom God dwells in fullness, and who was born as the humblest and most destitute of people, executed by a provincial governor, right? That God fully indwells someone like that means that God fully indwells all things, right? And so, yeah, you really only get to God by understanding and embracing that message. And if you say, well, you have to believe certain things about Jesus, otherwise you're excluded. You have not really understood Jesus. You're not really believing in Jesus. So yeah, you can only come to the Father through Jesus. But what does that mean? If you're saying, oh, well, you don't belong, then you're not going through Jesus. You're going through something else. So I don't know if that's helpful or if that's more confusing. And also, eternal life, especially in the Gospel of John, has almost nothing to do with the afterlife. The afterlife is a continuation of this life. Eternal life begins here and now, insofar as we let it happen and embrace it and stop grasping after other things and trying to kick people out of the country for whatever reason, or out of our lives and out of our communities. As soon as we're trying to keep people out, we're creating hell on earth. If we want the kingdom of God to be present, it starts with loving and embracing everyone. What does Jesus say about war? Anything? That's a really good question. The only thing that comes to mind particularly is there will be wars and rumors of wars when he talks about, which I always find interesting a little bit, because when hasn't there been wars or rumors of wars? So I don't know if he's sort of being sly there a little bit and saying, pretty much the end time is always here. I am always being present. You can always look into the clouds and see me. Right? But I would probably key in specifically when Jesus says, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. And so and I know this may surprise you, and it may be in disagreement with you, but I am a pacifist, and I do think that the teachings of the early church were pacifistic. Not all of them, but I think that's where the general sort of movement goes. And I know not everybody believes that. And I'm not saying you have to believe it, because if you don't believe it, then you're going to go to hell. But, because that would seem to be like ignoring Jesus. But I think it's hard to, love your enemies, do good to those who persecute you. There's some tension there, right? And not everyone who follows Jesus is necessarily a pacifist, and I'm okay with that. But I do think at the very least we should start with that, and then if we are going to say anything about war, it needs to be in that lens and with that consideration. So, complicated topic, and I don't know if Jesus did not come out with a list of things that said this is when it's okay to go to war and this is how you should conduct it, etc. So, if that's an answer to your question. What was the biggest moment of doubt in your life? Man. I don't know. I can't think of the biggest doubt. I mean, I certainly live with doubt off and on. So I don't know. I feel like there's a funny answer I should come up with. I do. Do I? No. Actually, it was not a moment of doubt at all. I don't know. I think maybe it was kind of becoming a pastor. Is this something I really want to do? Is this, I remember talking to a friend of mine, kind of a mentor of mine, after I'd been in my first church for 3 or 4 months, and we were just talking, and he's just yeah, he's up and down. He goes, yeah, it's been, have you gotten sick yet? It's yeah. He goes, yeah, it happened. He just, we have these sort of reactions when our lives are turned upside down for various reasons. I think I live with consistently with a low level of doubt, rather a big doubt suddenly. Does watching for small pauses through the day equal practical faith practice? Sure, yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah. I mean, I think sometimes it's a very useful practice. I mean, for me, it's like looking for small moments of beauty. Like I can just open my eyes, look around, and find something of beauty. And whenever I find something of beauty, that reminds me that God is present everywhere and in all things. And that's the big story. The small story is the trouble I'm going through right now. And that's real, But the bigger story is God's presence with us. So yeah, I think watching for small positives, count your blessings. I know that's sort of like, a bit cliched. But there is something about that is a reminder, right? A reminder. Because, yeah, I mean, life can be really terrible. Really terrible. And I don't think we should be Pollyannish about that. But I do think that practice, of that, especially if you struggle with anxiety or depression or something like that, that can be a really important sort of exercise, practice, discipline, you are what you do every day. How do you approach a big decision, discernment, and finding a path forward? I think I talked about that. I don't. I sort of feel my way forward, and it just sort of it just sort of takes form. It gradually takes form. If you're just persistent. I don't know. And I think knowing when to give up is a good thing to know too. I don't know how you learn that, but it's a good thing to learn. What are your thoughts on assisted suicide? I think life is precious because God is life. I also think there's a difference between preserving life and prolonging death. There's a real difference between prolonging life and prolonging death. And we can stick you on a machine and keep you alive forever these days. And I just think, and that's only happened in the last 50 years. How many thousands and thousands of years have we, just died from very small things that today would be nothing, right? So I think we, I hate to say, we go too far. I wouldn't say that, because I do think life is precious and life is a gift from God. Also, it's not the end. That's kind of core to our faith. And that, it's okay. I worry, what I worry about is a nation state getting the reins to that and having processes and procedures to determine whose life isn't worth living anymore. I'm really worried about that. I'm not super positive about that. I don't have a lot of faith in that. So, why don't we recite I assume this is the King James Lord's Prayer. We do it at the 8:30 service. I don't know if you know this, but the Bible is written in Greek. So the original Lord's Prayer is in Greek, and not only that, but we actually have two different versions. The one in Matthew and the one in Luke have some differences, not insignificant differences. So the ones we use in our liturgy. It's a part of our worship services. It's a part of the ritual practice that we have of worship. And so the one that we say, even the sort of, quote, more modern or contemporary normal English for us, is still a sort of pulling some different things from each of those together and kind of mushing it together into something that sort of, approximates both what's in Matthew and what's in Luke, with a doxological ending, right? For the kingdom and the glory and the power, right? So why is that? Because the Lord's Prayer is not for us an academic text. It is a way of communal prayer. It is a religious practice that we all participate in. And to do that, we have a language that we all agree on. And we drop these and thous because we don't use these and thous. So there's nothing wrong with the old one. It's not better than the new one. But the importance is that it's part of, it doesn't there's not a Lord's Prayer that is this sort of perfect atom that we should all try to emulate. right? It is a living, breathing prayer, right? That is lived and breathed in the spirit and the breath of the church, right? So it's part of our tradition. It's part of our contemporary religious practice. And to like nail it down to a specific time and place or form is a mistake. I mean, people used to say it in Latin. So, and before that in Greek. So that's why. And we use modern language because we want people who aren't familiar with the language of the 16th and 17th century to understand what we're saying. Right? What is your favorite of the songs we sing in church? If it isn't a holiday hymn, what is your favorite of those? Favorite song? I don't know. Favorite songs are hard for me. I don't know. I like most of the holiday hymns. I've been singing them so long. I like Joy of the World. I like A Little Town of Bethlehem. I like In the Bleak Midwinter, even though it probably wasn't that cold when Jesus was born. But I don't think they have a lot of freezes in Bethlehem. But there's just something. Again, there's something about the lived experience of Christians that speaks into that story, like as a dialogue with that story. So I like all the good ones. How important was music during the time of Jesus? It was super important. People sang all the time. People used to sing a lot. Outside of church, the only place, I remember the first time I watched international soccer, and I was like, they're all singing. They're not singing the national anthem. They're like singing their songs. They're just like singing a bunch of songs. People don't sing together, except at soccer matches and church. And maybe they kind of like mouth, the national anthem, which is, granted, is a very hard song to sing. And that's like a new horrible development in our society. It's one of those new terrible, terrible things that we've developed, is we don't, I mean, it used to, even, I don't know, some of you remember, like people get together for a Bible study. The first thing they do, they would sing a hymn or a song that they would all know. Or you go to camp. Now people sing at camp. That used to be a lot more prevalent part of people's lives. So yes, and the people, even like at even have very specifically at the end of the Last Supper. And when they had sung a hymn, they went out and went to the Mount of Olives. Right. So singing, knowing and singing the Psalms. A lot of the scriptures in Paul are hymns, almost certainly hymns. We know because of the sort of rhythmic pattern to some of them. So there are a lot of things that, especially in Paul's letters, that we have that are basically categorized as like early Christian hymns. And it's really important because if they're early Christian hymns that a lot of people know that Paul's quoting, that means whatever's in those hymns was like everyone kind of knew. If I said Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound, you go, oh yeah, I know that. Well, you know that because it's at least as old as you are, and we know it's a lot older than you. So if Paul's quoting it, we know that's a really old, established part of their culture and lives. So we know the ideas in that are really old, older than Paul, right? So anyway. Are the things at MCM going the way you're happy with? Sure. Yeah, I mean, again, it's ups and downs, it's backs and forth, but yeah, so far, so good, I don't know. I don't think about, am I happy with it? I guess I'm thinking like, does it feel like we're living in the spirit of the kingdom as a community? And having an impact on our community. And that doesn't always make me feel really happy that we are, because that's not my emotional makeup, but I think that's maybe more important than whether I wake up with a song in my heart every morning, which I have to tell you I don't. When hiking trail in the world would you like to go on? I don't know. There's one in New Zealand I'm kind of fascinated with. I've heard it's pretty amazing. I might get down there one day, but I don't know. America has a bunch of amazing trails that I haven't even begun to explore. So, what is your belief about what becomes of us after death? My belief is that we continue in some way. If you ask me more than that, then I'm not really sure. I'm speculating. But I think we are drawn into a higher realm. I think our memories and our consciousness in some way is preserved, but maybe in a new and different way. I think I told the joke about the twins in the womb who are having the argument about whether do you believe in life after birth. And like, well, now maybe we'll eat with our mouths and sell of our belly buttons. And everybody was like, oh, that's crazy. So so that to me is like such a huge difference that I think it's impossible to speculate about. But I believe it because of the community of faith that has passed that on, because of the community of humanity that has told these stories again and again, and because of experiences that I've had. And so I think it's not that I don't ever have any doubt about it, but I mean, I have doubt about whether the car is going to start in the morning, so I don't know how much to, put that on. But yeah, absolutely. As much as I believe in anything else. So, if you live anywhere in the world for a year, where would it be? Why? I don't know. Honestly, China's kind of fascinating to me. I've never been there. I've never even been to Asia, but it feels like it'd be kind of an interesting place to be right now, especially. Was there a course or area of study in seminary that you found particularly challenging? Hebrew. Hebrew was tough. I studied Latin and Italian and Spanish and German. Hebrew is the only sort of non-Indo-European language that I studied, and it's very different. It's just different. And so that was really difficult. Sort of the one that, it was the Bible study, the really sort of in-depth books of the Bible studies that we did. Holy crap. Okay. I'm not going to go into that. But I read the Bible, and it was like, the Bible doesn't say what you think it says. And that was a challenge that broke and reformed my faith. So